Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Monday edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and today is roster projection day at Big Blue View. Giants have to set their 53-man roster by Tuesday at 4 p.m. My roster projection is already up at Big Blue View. Commenters are already poking holes in it. And since I'm such a glutton for punishment, I invited Big Blue View's Chris Flum on to poke his own holes in what I did. How you do? how you doing this morning, Chris?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's raining outside right now, but I'm nice and dry, so let's get to it.
Oh, there you go. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through my roster projection, and I'll kind of briefly give you some of my reasoning. And Chris, you can agree, disagree, poke holes in my reasoning, tell me I'm an idiot like everybody else does,
Okay, Ed, you're an idiot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, let's go. Quarterback. I have all three quarterbacks making the roster: Jones, Taylor, and Davis Webb. Obviously, there's a decision to be made with Webb simply for the reason that teams oftentimes keep only two quarterbacks. That third quarterback's generally inactive on Sundays. So there's the theory that you're wasting a roster spot. I just think that Webb has been too good and he deserves it. And B, I think that if you try to pass him through waivers and get him to the practice squad, somebody is going to scoop him up and make him their number two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the depth chart as you have it, Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, Davis Webb, is how it shakes out. But there's no way the Giants are able to sneak Webb through the waiver wire. I honestly wouldn't be terribly surprised if they were getting calls about him just based on how he played against the Bengals and then against the Jets. Yeah, I would honestly feel better about having Davis Webb as my backup than Sam Darnold or whatever's going on down over and down in Pittsburgh, places like maybe Atlanta or out in Houston. Yeah, places like those could use Davis Webb as a number two. Also, have to look at the Jones and Taylor's injury histories. Those guys get hurt. Tyrod Taylor has already gotten hurt. So having a player like Davis Webb who can be kind of a coach in the room, he was going to be a coach, and knows the system, and we have seen execute it very efficiently. Having him there it's worth having the roster spot, even if he doesn't play.
All right. Plus the fact that I think, it's preseason is preseason, but he's been better than Tyrod Taylor in the preseason games, to be honest. But let's move on to running back. I have the Giants keeping 4 running backs. I think, to be honest, that 3 of them were pretty obvious before this weekend's game against the Jets. Obviously, you've got Barkley, Matt Breida as number 2. I think Antonio Williams, who the Giants signed from the Buffalo Bills, has played well enough despite Sunday's fumble to make a roster spot. I think I'm not sure I know any human beings who would not have fumbled the way that Quan Alexander hit Antonio Williams on Sunday. But for me, the real decision is second-year man Gary Brightwell versus undrafted free agent Jay Sean Corbin. And this was a 50-50. You can make an argument either way. I chose Corbin, who I thought showed a lot in the preseason. I have the Giants with Brightwell on the practice squad. Thoughts on that, Chris?
I think that's fair. I'm curious to see if they keep 3 or 4 runners, period. That might come down to the numbers game at the other positions.
This is true. As I look at this too, I've thought about this position ever since I actually posted this prediction, and I wonder if I got this one wrong when it comes to the 4th running back, to be honest with you. I think the Giants might have tipped their hand a little bit yesterday because Gary Brightwell, who we didn't see do this a year ago with Joe Judge as head coach, Gary Brightwell handled all of the kickoff return duties for the first time yesterday. And I wonder if Brightwell, because Thomas McGahee, special teams coordinator, loves him, and if they think he can be the kickoff returner, I wonder if he makes the roster. And for depth purposes, they try to pass Corbin to the practice squad. So I'm already second guessing myself on this one and wondering if I got it wrong.
I think that's really just a mark of how good the competition between Antonio Williams, Deshaun Corbin, and Gary Brightwell was over the course of camp and this preseason. Each one of them showed a lot. Williams was definitely the best runner of the three, but Corbin was a weapon in the passing game. He was dependable. He saw a lot of targets in the air, and we know this team's going to want to throw the ball. And then Brightwell, he did everything pretty well, and he has always been a standout special teams player. So it really could be a coin flip between Brightwell and Corbin, and they might come down saying, yeah, we want the special teams acumen if we're going to carry 4 running backs.
Yeah, and I do wonder if they're going to carry 4. I think they will. As I shaped this roster, I can see space and use for all 4. So that's how I went. Let's go to tight end, Chris. And in my roster projection, I only have 3 making the roster. And the Giants only have 4 on the roster as we speak. They have Daniel Bellinger, Chris Myrick, newly acquired Tanner Hudson, and undrafted free agent rookie Austin Allen. And what I have here is I have Austin Allen going to the practice squad with the Giants, keeping Bellinger, Myrick, and Hudson. And listen, I think this is a spot where GM Joe Shane is going to be scouring the waiver wire and looking for more help, because Myrick and Tanner Hudson as your second and third tight ends is not really inspiring.
Yeah, that's somewhat less than ideal. I was pretty impressed by Austin Allen over the course of the preseason. I thought he flashed. He made some nice plays, but those were all against really third string guys, at least for the most part. Yet Tanner Hudson hasn't been with the team long. I'm not sure if he is eligible for the practice squad, especially with the way that the rules have changed in recent years. I don't know if he's put in too much time in the NFL to make it through to the practice squad. I wouldn't be surprised if, like you said, Joe Shane scours the waiver wire and the Giants' third tight end isn't on the roster right now, and they try to sneak Hudson and Allen both through to the practice squad. Again, looking at how the numbers game shakes out at other positions. This is one where the depth is concerning, and they could probably find an upgrade, get cut, and land on the waiver wire from another team.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I said when I wrote my post on Monday morning, this for me has been very, very difficult, this particular projection. And I know that I'm not going to get it 100% right. I mean, there are a lot of competitive spots. There are a lot of spots where you can argue for guys one way or the other. You have a brand new GM and a brand new head coach with no roster construction track record, and you've got injuries to work around. So there are just so many variables. I mean, I'll be happy, to be honest with you. I think I'll be happy if, once we see all of these projections, I'll be happy if I nail about 43 to 45.
Yeah, that's fair enough, I think. And one thing I know when we were talking about this before we started recording is we don't have a big track record with this regime, with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. We don't generally know what they look for in players. Like, I freely admit I was way off on as many scouting reports as I did during the draft. I only had reports prepared on the first 2 guys the Giants drafted.
Yeah,
Just
you weren't
because,
happy about that either.
no, that really annoys me. I did well over 100 scouting reports, and I only got 2. So, but part of that is we just don't know what they're looking for or where they are looking. So
Exactly. We have no we have no real track record. We will learn. I think we learned some things about Joe Shane's draft tendencies, and I think we'll learn some things about their roster building tendencies here as well. Chris, let's go to the wide receiver spot. I have 6 guys making the roster. I have Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, David Sills, and Richie James. And first, let me say this. Kenny Golladay isn't going anywhere. No one is trading for that contract, and the Giants cannot cut him. He's got a salary cap hit of 21 million and change. And if they cut him, that cap hit goes up to 25 million. And you simply cannot carry a $25 million cap hit for a player that you've cut. I think that people just need to relax, realize that Kenny Galladay's been a good player for a while, and realize that preseason is preseason. Golladay may not be Julio Jones, but he's going to be part of this roster, and the Giants are going to need him to produce. That said, I think David Sills has to make the roster. I think that you can argue about Richie James when it comes to CJ Board, Alex Bachman, Darius Slayton, who I still think is trade bait. Even Jalen Moore, who the Giants just signed last week, is a guy who I'm intrigued by and I think might land on the practice squad. Chris, your thoughts on this group?
This, I think, is the first place where the numbers game might come into play. And Alex Bachman might have done enough to force his way onto the roster, maybe at the expense of that 4th running back. Now, 7 receivers is kind of lopsided, and we've seen the Giants try to cobble together lopsided rosters where they've got guys they just feel like they can't cut. They can't get through to the practice squad. Just kind of a deep cut and a throwback, but that one year when they just had to get Adwale Ajomo onto the roster, and they wound up with something like 8 defensive ends on their final roster.
They had a year a couple of years ago where their initial 53 had 9 linebackers on it.
Yes. And that does throw things off for the entire rest of the roster. But man, Alex Bachman played well. And it's tough to cut a guy after he has a preseason like that. And yes, it is preseason. But then you also kind of flash back to Victor Cruz. And the Giants just barely squeaked him on the injured reserve with a hamstring injury that the NFL looked at a little bit closely.
But I do. Bachman did play well, Chris. The thing about it is Bachman's not a rookie. Bachman is a 4th-year player. He spent 3 NFL seasons on the practice squad. I think that as well as he's played, I've had the opportunity to talk to him a couple times during the preseason. He's a great young man, easy to talk to. I think Alex Bachman has shown us what he is already. And if he's lucky, he might be able to be, bottom of the roster, maybe a punt return guy. But I think it's telling that Richie James, despite lack of production, maybe in the preseason games, Richie James got reps with Daniel Jones consistently throughout camp. Alex Bachman got all of his work with Davis Webb in the 3s. And I think that tells us a lot about how the roster is going to fall in the end. So I'd love to see Bachman on the roster, but I don't see it.
Yeah, and those are the things that Joe Jane has to reckon with. And just one other observation is the Giants definitely need Kenny Golladay or David Sills, preferably both of them, to step up and produce, because everybody else that is likely to make this roster is either a slot receiver or a gadget receiver. Now, I know Ryan Daboll said Sterling Shepard can play everywhere. I have thought that in the past. I am not sure after the Achilles injury if Shepard can line up out wide, because we saw him younger, less injured, try that under Joe Judge back in 2020, and it really didn't work that well. I thought he might be able to play like a younger Antonio Brown, but his skill set is really as a slot receiver. Then you've got Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, again, very similar skill sets. They are best, I think, with manufactured touches, getting them the ball in space. Neither one are really X or flanker type receivers. That is, of the Giants wide receivers, Galladay and David Sills. Now, this is where it really hurts to have Colin Johnson go down with that injury, because then you could have had three big receivers who could line up outside, have that height weight mismatch, and really work to create room underneath for the smaller guys.
Yeah, I do feel awful for Colin Johnson because he would have made this roster. There's no doubt in my mind. I think that perhaps Johnson staying healthy might have really forced the Giants to consider keeping 7 guys. I want to say this, though, about David Sills. I feel really good for him. I'll be shocked if he doesn't make this roster. He's been getting a lot of work with the first team over the past couple of weeks. And I think that when you think about Daniel Jones and you think about making Daniel Jones comfortable, and you think about the relationship that Sills and Jones have formed over the last couple of years, Sills has practically been Jones' travel buddy in the offseason. He goes everywhere with Jones. He shows up everywhere Jones shows up to throw. He stays after practice to throw with Jones. And what you see is a relationship between Sills and Jones that is terrific. I mean, there's a lot of chemistry there. And while he may not be the most talented, most athletic wide receiver on the roster, completions are completions. And I think you have to lean into that relationship a little bit. And I certainly hope that the Giants will do that.
Yeah, and as you have said from really the beginning of training camp, the Giants want to make use of option routes. You told me it was like Kevin Gilbride level of sophistication in this offense, which we didn't really get a chance to see in the preseason because it's preseason. And a big part of that, a huge part of that, of making that style of offense work, is the relationship between the wide receiver and the quarterback. Hakeem Nicks and Eli Manning were fantastic at that. Also, Eli had a great relationship with Victor Cruz, a great chemistry with Cruz. And we saw what that offense can do when that chemistry is there. And having Sills out there could allow them to make greater use of that style of offense. So I honestly wouldn't be terribly surprised if David Sills winds up being one of the first 3 receivers on the field when they're in 11 personnel packages.
Absolutely, especially if Kadarius Toney is not able to get on the field consistently. But Chris, let's move on to the offensive line, where this has been complicated all summer because of injuries. Because we've seen injuries to Shane Lemieux, we've seen John Feliciano, the starting center, in and out of the lineup. A lot of the backup guys. Josh Azudu's been hurt. Ben Bredesen has an elbow injury. Giants lost Marcus McKethan to a torn ACL. They had signed Matt Gano to be their backup, to be their swing tackle, and he obviously has a neck injury that might end his career. So it's been kind of in flux the entire summer. In the end, I have 9 guys making the roster. I have Andrew Thomas, Shane Lemieux, John Feliciano, Mark Glowinski, and Evan Neal listed as your starting offensive line. Now, Lemieux has already been ruled out for week 1. And unfortunately, all of the guys who would generally be his backups, being Azudu and Ben Bredesen, are also hurt right now and haven't really practiced in a couple of weeks. The 4 backups I have making the roster are Azudu, Bredesen, Jamil Douglas, and Devery Hamilton. I think Hamilton right now is your starting left guard. Maybe the surprise of the whole bunch is that I have Max Garcia, veteran offensive lineman, spent last year with Arizona. I have him not making the initial roster. Um, I also happen to think this is a place where again Joe Shane will be scouring the waiver wire. Chris, your thoughts on the 9 guys that I have that I've selected here.
Yeah, no arguments with any of it. And I do like that you note that there could be some maneuvering after final cut downs with Lemieux and Max Garcia, placing Shane Lemieux on the injured reserve. If they do it after final cut downs, it is not season ending, so they could bring him back at a later date when he is actually healthy, and then have Garcia there as your backup guard center, which, man, the injuries that hit the interior of this offensive line, the Giants, they might have 9 offensive linemen, but they're still going to be razor thin as far as depth goes, at least early on into the season. Yeah, if Lemieux isn't on the roster, we don't really know what's up with Izudu. Uh, I have looked, I haven't seen any admission from the Giants of what his injury actually is. I still have it down as unknown. Bredesen with that arm injury, those can be tricky for offensive linemen because, you need to get your hands on defensive tackles. So that really just leaves you with Jamil Douglas and Devery Hamilton. And Douglas has had an ankle injury. So it's kind of just Devery Hamilton there. And he has been a great surprise. He has played really well and he's very versatile, which is great. But whew.
Yeah, I feel bad for Bredesen because I mean back in the spring I didn't think there was a chance Bredesen would make this roster, but he seems to have adapted pretty well to learning the center position. He had a really good spring, really good training camp until he got hurt. I still think he makes this roster. As for Izudu, we don't know what his injury is. Giants are not required to tell us about injuries. They're not required to put together injury reports during training camp, so they haven't necessarily told us. I'm pretty sure it's a leg injury of some sort. We've seen him out there in walkthroughs and stretching periods and things like that, but he hasn't done any teamwork. So, yeah, and I thought he would be the Giants' 6th lineman. I thought he would be the first option off the bench, but but that's not going to happen until he gets back out on the field. Last thing I wanted to say about offensive linemen, I want to clear up one thing about Roy Mbateka, the Nigerian 6'9", 320-pound offensive tackle that the Giants signed. Yes, they discovered Mbateka through the International Pathway Program, but he was not assigned to the Giants through the Pathway Program. They saw him, they brought him in, they worked him out, they signed him as a true free agent. So there is no roster exemption for Mbateka if they go to put him on the practice squad, which they will certainly try to do. He will count against the 16-player practice squad. So just keep that in mind. I know that's a question that Giants fans have had. I thought, for what it's worth, a guy who never played football before, didn't even know how to put pads on a month ago, I thought he did remarkably well, all things considered.
Yeah, he's a definite practice squad candidate, and he's the type of guy I think the coaches are going to want to work with and want to develop. And I really do think the Giants are going to be looking at the waiver wire here on the offensive line, and it is probably a good thing that they're going to have a higher priority than the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, I just I think they have to look at options on the offensive line. They don't have really a true swing tackle on the roster right now. I mean, Devery Hamilton could be that guy. So I suppose he would be, but he's probably your starting left guard to begin the season. So Devery Hamilton could be the swing tackle. Izudu could be the swing tackle. I'd feel better if there was a guy that had started some games in the NFL and had some experience. And besides which, as well as Devery Hamilton played throughout the preseason, if there's a starting caliber left guard available off the waiver wire, the Giants might snap him up.
Yeah, the Giants do have a bunch of versatile depth players, but their depth has been depleted by all of these injuries so much that versatility has kind of already been used up. And if they can find a guard that they would be fine with having as a starter, that would also really help their depth by freeing Hamilton up to be that swing tackle or four tool backup. I'd say Hamilton and also Azudu kind of remind me of Kevin Booth back in the day with just the ability to move between positions. And that is a really valuable skill to have, even if it's not starting games.
Absolutely. Hey, Chris, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. And we'll start with the interior of the defensive line. I have 5 guys making the roster. Obviously, Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence. Obviously, 5th-round pick DJ Davidson, who might well be your backup nose tackle. And I had a really hard time with the last couple of spots, to be honest with you. I have Jalen Holmes and Ryder Anderson, the undrafted free agent, making the roster here. And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea if I'm going to be right about this. I think Jalen Holmes is a guy who sort of plays the 5 tech quite a bit. I've seen him quite a bit as a member of the first group when the Giants are actually in their base. But I've also seen Nick Williams in that role. So I have the veteran tackles, Nick Williams and Justin Ellis, not making the roster. But to be honest, this is a spot where I kind of threw my hands up and said, well, I've got to put a couple of names down, and you can probably talk me in or out of any of these guys between Holmes, Anderson, Williams, and Ellis.
Yeah, I think also part of it is we just don't know how much true defensive linemen are going to be used in this defense. We know Wink Martindale is going to blitz. We know he's going to be aggressive in his pressures. We know he's going to use a lot of sub packages and a lot of different looks up front. There will probably be plays where they only have 1 down lineman or maybe 2 down linemen.
I can tell you this. I can tell you you're not going to see, although 3-4 is considered their base. Wink Martindale has said as much. That's considered their base. You're not going to see 3 down linemen a whole heck of a lot. Wink Martindale has admitted that. He said basically the way defense is played, you're not in your base defense very often. And when the Giants are not in their base defense, you're going to see 2 defensive linemen, if not 1.
Yeah, so I think having 5 defensive linemen on the roster is probably the right number. The question really is which ones will it be? Yeah, I don't know how much this team will rely on having a nose tackle or if they'll want more athletic guys who can penetrate, which if they do, that really does make it difficult for Justin Ellis to make the team. If they do want a nose tackle, then Ellis might bump Ryder Anderson off and they might try to sneak him through to the practice squad. Yeah, I don't look at Dexter Lawrence as a nose tackle candidate. Yes, he is massive. He is a massive human being and he is very powerful. But to my eye, he has never really played the nose tackle very well at all.
Well,
He
no, go
just
ahead.
doesn't seem to have the natural feel for angles and leverages that almost natural wrestler to him to be a really good nose tackle. And also, he is just so explosive and powerful and agile that he is much more useful attacking a single gap, going through stunts and twists, maybe lining him up on an offensive tackle and saying, here, deal with this monster. And just having him in the middle, holding the A gaps, occupying the guard and center is almost a waste of his physical abilities. DJ Davidson, I like what I've seen from him in there at the nose tackle. Teams don't run too well up the middle when he's in there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I move on to edge, I'm just going to say this. I think that Chris, I think that when the Giants are in 3 down linemen, I think it's going to annoy you because I think most of the time you're going to see Dexter Lawrence at the nose. I think so. I think you're going to be annoyed there.
Yeah,
But
it wouldn't be
anyway,
the first time.
let's move on to edge. And this is a position that is complicated by the injury to second year edge defender Ellerson Smith, who's missed several weeks now with a foot injury. I have Aziz Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeau, Jihad Ward, Smith, and O'Shane Zimenez making the roster. I have Quincy Roche out, and I have undrafted free agent Tomon Fox going to the practice squad. Now, at the beginning of training camp, I never would have put O'Shane Zimenez on this roster, but all throughout camp, it's been clear that O'Shane Zimenez has gotten more opportunities than Quincy Roche. So I kind of feel like you have to believe what you see and believe that this coaching staff appears to prefer Zimenez. Tomon Fox is a guy I think the Giants would probably try to squeeze to the practice squad if they can. What I also think is going to happen here, it would not surprise me if Ellerson Smith makes the roster and then is placed on IR, which would give the Giants the opportunity to bring him back and perhaps to keep Quincy Roche on the roster as well. So that's kind of how I see that position, playing out. But it's a little bit complicated by the Smith situation.
Yeah, I think that is what we might see with the injuries to Aziz Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau. We don't know if they're going to be available for week 1. So that would potentially only leave the Giants with these 5 edges, Jihad Ward and O'Shane Zimenez as their starters. And really, if Ellerson Smith isn't able to go, no depth behind them. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see that same kind of roster gymnastics where they initially put Ellerson Smith on the roster and then move him over to the injured reserve with the intention of activating him later, and then having Quincy Roche re-signed onto the active roster, or potentially try. Well, yeah, no, if they put Tomon Fox on the waiver wire, maybe they could elevate him from the practice squad. But yeah, I think we could see Roche eventually make the roster because he might have been behind Zimenez on the depth chart, but Roche has flashed throughout the preseason. He has gotten pressure on quarterbacks. He has made some plays. And that's also tough to ignore, especially in the context of the injuries to Ojulari and Thibodeau.
Absolutely, but it's also tough to ignore the fact that all of those plays have come against second and third team guys. And just as an aside, in the locker room after Sunday's game, I had a chance to talk to Roche, and I asked him about the lack of first team opportunities, and all he did was look at the floor and shake his head like I have no idea why. Coming off of last year where he did a good job, it was pretty obvious that he didn't understand the being down the depth chart or rep chart as Brian Daboll would call it.
Obviously, Wink is holding Roche's background as a brief Pittsburgh Steeler against him. That's the only explanation.
There you go. All right, let's talk about inside linebacker. I have 5 inside linebackers making the roster here, and let's just say, up front, I feel really bad for Darian Beavers because Darian Beavers, had he not gotten hurt, Beavers would have not only been on this roster, but I think Beavers was going to work his way into a decent amount of playing time eventually. Although Beavers was playing the mic behind Blake Martinez, I think that the Giants were going to have to find a way to get him on the field. Anyway, I have Martinez, Tay Crowder, rookie Micah McFadden, Cam Brown, and the 5th spot was one where I went back and forth, and I can see going either way. I have journeyman Austin Calitro making the roster, and I have Carter Coughlin being out, probably going to the practice squad. And I know that Coughlin has inside outside flexibility. I know he's been a part of the special teams for the last couple of years. But this for me was a situation where I just couldn't ignore the performance of Austin Calitro in the preseason. And you just Sunday alone, he had a pick six. He had a forced fumble. He had a tackle for loss. This guy can play special teams. I think he's probably been with half the league at this point, but I couldn't ignore the fact that Austin Calitro kept showing up, and I barely noticed Carter Coughlin the entire summer.
Yeah, I think Calitro has, like David Sills and Colin Johnson, he has pretty much forced his way onto this roster. I thought Coughlin, his versatility, his athleticism, he's a lot better athlete than he gets credit for. And his background as an edge player who has kind of cross-trained inside, attempted the transition. Yeah, I thought that could play well in Martindale's defense. But yeah, I just haven't seen it with him. Although the guy I kind of find myself focusing on is Tay Crowder. And I do wonder if he might wind up being one of those shocking cuts, because there are shockers every year. Guys, we just do not see getting cut, who ultimately do get cut, especially when you have a new regime stepping in. Yeah, Tay Crowder played a lot last year after Blake Martinez got hurt. And while he's athletic and he did his best to step up, I think the Giants could find an upgrade there. And maybe Micah McFadden or Austin Calitro are that upgrade. So that is one spot where I'm not going to say he will get cut, but just maybe keep an eye on that.
No, that's a good point. If there's going to be a shocker, it might involve Crowder. The thing that makes me wonder about that, I mean, he still spent the entire summer working with the first team. And you wonder if the Giants are going to have the guy spend the whole summer working with the first team and then cut him. But if you're looking for a surprise cut, yeah, that's definitely a name to keep in mind. Chris, let's talk about cornerback. I have 6 cornerbacks making the roster. Obviously, your top 3 are Adoree Jackson, Darnay Holmes, and Aaron Robinson, who, by the way, we'll just say Aaron Robinson did not inspire confidence this summer at all. As much as I like the kid, I like his aggression. He just did not inspire any confidence. The 4th cornerback that I have making the roster is Cordale Flott, 3rd round pick. Just let's cross our fingers and hope that Cordale learns how to tackle somebody. But I also have Elijah Griffin and Darren Evans making the roster. And let's be honest, I pretty much threw up my hands when it came to the last 2 spots and said, I've got to give them to somebody. Let me give them to these 2 guys. I think the Giants kind of told us on Sunday that Griffin is making the roster by barely using him, and by taking a really long look at Darren Evans, by taking a long look at Khalil Dorsey, a long look at Zion Gilbert, a long look at Harrison Hand. I think they know already that they want to keep Elijah Griffin, who can play inside and outside. I think they know they want him on the roster. I have Darren Evans as my 6th guy because I really didn't know who else to put on there. The Harrison Hand I thought was going to make this roster. Then he gave up a big touchdown to Denzel Mims the other day, so I don't know how much that'll count against him. The one thing that has me sort of befuddled is Rodarius Williams, 2nd-year corner who hasn't practiced since the first couple of days of training camp. I don't know what his status is. I have him out, but this is another one of those situations where the Giants could put him on the 53 and then IR him and fill that spot with someone from their current roster or someone from the waiver wire. So again, this is one where I'm throwing up my hands and going, I think there could be one or more people on this roster in a day or so who aren't on it right now.
Yeah, I think this is a position where the only four we should put down in ink are Jackson, Robinson, Holmes, and Flott. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just given how important the secondary is to Wink Martindale's schemes, they will be looking at every team in the NFL and looking at every single waiver wire and looking to make any upgrade they can. Because, like you said, Aaron Robinson hasn't been inspiring. And we know Adoree Jackson has an injury history. So not only do the Giants just use a lot of defensive backs, we are going to a nickel defense will be their base defense. They will probably be using quite a bit of dime defense. We will probably be seeing 3 corners, 4 corners on the field for almost every single snap. And if they can upgrade their depth at all, they will. That don't know who it's going to be. Maybe Elijah Griffin is the best guy they can get for one of those spots and they get an upgrade for Darren Evans. Maybe they can upgrade both of those, but they're going to be looking for upgrades. And I don't think their final cornerback depth chart is entirely on the roster right now.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, let's talk about safety. And I have 4 safeties making the roster, and the fourth one is a guy that a week ago, 10 days ago, I would not have expected to have on my final 53. I have Xavier McKinney, Julian Love, 4th round pick Dane Belton, who I think the Giants expect to be healthy, if not for week 1, very soon thereafter, after he broke his collarbone early in training camp. The 4th safety that I have on this roster is Nate Metters. And this is a guy, I'm not sure, I don't remember offhand where he played a year ago, but this is a guy who had 12 tackles on Sunday. And listen, tackle numbers are not always the best way to judge guys, but he's done very little wrong throughout training camp. He's been where he's supposed to be. He's made the plays he needs to make. He had an interception on Sunday, and that was negated by a penalty. And I know that people were surprised when the Giants cut Andrew Adams, and I think that was less about Adams than it was about where Joe Shane and Brian Daboll think this team is, and they think that Younger is probably better at this point wherever they can go that way. And for me, I know a lot of people have said, well, Trenton Thompson, undrafted free agent out of San Diego State, might make this roster. But if you think about going young, Nate Metters is 25 years old, even though this is his 4th year in the NFL. Trenton Thompson is a 26-year-old undrafted free agent rookie. So I'm not sure that counts as going young. I might prefer to go with a younger guy that's already got some experience.
Yeah, if they limit themselves to 4 safeties, it might just work out that way. But this might be where the shocker cut comes in, and we could see like perhaps Tay Crowder cut in favor of Trenton Thompson. What we know that the Giants have moved the Mike back to the safety position with Xavier McKinney wearing the green dot. We know they're going to be using a ton of sub packages and a lot of big nickel packages. Before Dane Belton broke his arm, I think it was probably pretty much a given that he was going to be a de facto linebacker or a pseudo linebacker in this defense. And I do wonder if we could see them go with just 4 linebackers and go with 5 safeties. That's kind of an unconventional roster construction, But if they're going to be using as many defensive backs as often as I think they might, that could be the way the math works out for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Chris, we have one thing left, and that's to talk about the three special teams positions. And really the only thing to talk about there is the fact that when the when the off season started, when training camp started, I wasn't 100% sure that that Jamie Gillen was going to be the Giants punter, and now I'd be shocked if the Giants went in a different direction. I think that I think that he's done really well, and I think he's earned that job.
Yeah, absolutely. I I was incredibly impressed, especially with his kicking or his punting rather, and his kicking against the Bengals. Particularly the one where directional punt really pinned the Bengals back right by the sideline. I wish I could make a golf ball do what he did. He made that football do, where it just jumped up, hopped, and stopped. That was very impressive. Also, him stepping in and kicking relatively well when Graham Gano went down with that concussion, which Gano will be back. There's plenty of time for him to get back. And Casey Kreider has been exactly what you want from a long snapper, basically invisible.
That is true. All right, Chris, I think that that we've gone through the entire roster, and shortly, pretty soon we'll know how wrong I was. We'll know how many of these, how close I got, how far away I was. One thing, just for Giants fans to expect: the Giants practice at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. The deadline for setting the initial 53 is 4 p.m. on Tuesday. I would expect that the Giants have their 53, at least their initial 53, by the time they hit the practice field on Tuesday. I do not think that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll will leave guys hanging and make a few guys practice not knowing whether or not they're going to make the roster. That it seems to me like those guys have been very careful to treat people well and to do the classy thing whenever they possibly can. So I think you're going to know sooner rather than later what your initial 53 is going to look like.
Yes, and also that gives them a chance to go through a practice with at least the first iteration of their final roster. They will get a chance to see what this team, at least the very first version of what the 2022 Giants will look like in practice.
Absolutely. All right, Chris. Thank you very, very much for hopping on short notice. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube, to subscribe on Big Blue View Radio, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you as always. Please remember to stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.